Welcome to Vault of Words, a place where centuries of human thought are opened through the voice of AI. Here we don't rush through ideas, we walk slowly through them. Each video is a doorway, each word a reflection, and every story begins with a single thought. Tonight we open another page and step quietly into the mind behind it. There's a quiet truth buried beneath every great transformation. It rarely begins with something grand. Change starts small, hidden inside the rhythm of ordinary days. A single choice, repeated often enough, becomes a system, and systems, not intentions, define who we become. In Atomic Habits, James Clear reframes the psychology of change, showing that greatness is never the product of one powerful act, but the slow accumulation of countless invisible decisions. Like atoms forming matter, small habits construct identity. Each repetition rewires the brain, carving paths of thought and behavior until identity itself begins to shift. You do not rise to the level of your goals. You fall to the level of your systems. And every system begins with one action, one moment of awareness that says, I can do this differently. This isn't set a story about success or motivation. It's a map of the smallest revolutions inside the human mind, the kind that unfolds silently day after day, until a person realizes they've become someone new. Before Atomic Habits became a book known to millions, it was simply a man trying to rebuild his life, one tiny step at a time. James Clear wasn't a scientist or a philosopher when this began. He was just a young baseball player whose life changed in a single shattering moment. In high school, a bat swung the wrong way and struck his face. The injury was catastrophic, multiple skull fractures, brain swelling, and a recovery that took months of physical and cognitive therapy. When he finally returned to the world, everything that had once felt automatic now demanded focus. He couldn't trust his memory, his coordination, or even his sense of identity. But in that emptiness, something powerful began to form. He started small, rebuilding one simple habit at a time, brushing his teeth at the same hour, writing down small goals, keeping his surroundings organized. They seemed meaningless on the surface, but together, they gave structure to a mind trying to find stability again. Those rituals became a framework, a set of invisible rails, guiding him back toward normalcy. Years later, when he began writing online about productivity and performance, he realized something profound. The science of transformation didn't lie in motivation or willpower, but in systems, the architecture beneath behavior. Clear began studying psychology, neuroscience, and behavioral economics, the domains where habit meets identity. He discovered the works of B.J. Fogg from Stanford, who described behavior as the result of three elements: motivation, ability, and a prompt. He explored Charles Duhigg's research from The Power of Habit, which broke habits into a neurological loop of cue, routine, and reward. But James Clear went deeper. He wanted to know not just how habits work, but how they accumulate into identity. Through his writing and experimentation, he began seeing a pattern. Small habits weren't just tools for improvement. They were reflections of self-image. The person who writes every morning starts to see themselves as a writer. The one who runs daily begins to believe they are an athlete. The habit doesn't just produce the result. It produces the identity that maintains it. In psychology, this is known as identity-based behavior. Humans act in ways consistent with who they believe they are. We repeat what reinforces the self. And if you change that self, even slightly, the actions follow automatically. It was this realization that turned Clear's personal recovery into a universal framework for growth. He called them atomic habits, small actions that, like atoms, are both fundamental and incredibly powerful when combined. Each one on its own seems insignificant, but together they form everything. Clear broke his philosophy into a simple yet elegant system. 4 laws of behavior change. Make it obvious. Make it attractive. Make it easy. Make it satisfying. Simple on the surface, but psychologically profound. Each law corresponds to a deeper principle in cognitive science. Obviousness shapes awareness, the first step of any transformation. Attractiveness manipulates dopamine, the brain's anticipation of reward. Ease removes friction, allowing momentum to grow. Satisfaction cements memory, embedding action into identity. Behind this simplicity lies an old truth reborn, that small actions, repeated with awareness, have always been the cornerstone of human evolution. From monks repeating mantras to soldiers rehearsing drills to artists sketching endlessly in silence, every system of mastery was built on atomic repetition. But the brilliance of Clear's insight was in making it modern, giving ancient wisdom a structure the modern mind could follow. He replaced guilt with design, replacing motivation with environment. He showed that success isn't about forcing change, but arranging conditions so that change becomes inevitable. In essence, Atomic Habits is not about habits at all. It's about engineering identity. You are not changing what you do. You are changing who you believe yourself to be, one small action at a time. James Clear's personal recovery became a metaphor for every human trying to rebuild something broken: confidence, discipline, focus, or purpose. He demonstrated that progress is not made through quantum leaps, but through silent increments, measured not in days but in repetitions. Every habit, he said, is a vote for the person you wish to become. No single vote changes who you are, but together they decide the outcome of your life's election. And so Atomic Habits began as a memoir of reconstruction, but evolved into a philosophy of quiet revolution, a psychology of becoming that has existed for as long as humans have tried to better themselves. The science was always there, in neurons that fire together and wire together, in dopamine loops that shape behavior, in the body's deep craving for predictability and reward. But what James Clear understood, what makes this book different, is that true transformation doesn't begin in the brain. It begins in the smallest promise you keep to yourself. Because when you keep that promise, again and again, something shifts. Not just in behavior, but in belief. And belief, once changed, is the most atomic force of all. The brilliance of Atomic Habits lies not in complexity, but in the quiet sophistication of its simplicity. 4 sentences. That's all it takes to contain the anatomy of human transformation. Make it obvious. Make it attractive. Make it easy. Make it satisfying. They read like instructions on a wall, but they carry the weight of thousands of years of psychology and philosophy behind them. To change what you do, you must first learn to see it. That's where everything begins. In awareness, you cannot alter a pattern that you cannot perceive. Most people believe they are conscious of their actions, yet most of what they do happens beneath the surface, automatic, unexamined, rehearsed 1,000 times before the mind even notices. We are creatures of invisible rhythm, brushing our teeth, reaching for our phones, filling silence with words, all without awareness. When James Clear wrote, "You cannot change what you are unaware of," he wasn't teaching productivity. He was describing a kind of awakening. The moment you see your behavior clearly, it loses its power over you. Awareness breaks the spell. It's like turning on a light in a room you've walked through, in the dark your entire life. This is why so many ancient traditions began with self-observation. The Stoics reflected at night on what they had done during the day. The Buddhists watched their breath and their thoughts, as though observing a stranger. Clear's modern version is simpler, but no less profound. Track your habits. Write them down. See them as they are, not as you wish them to be. Once seen, the invisible becomes negotiable. But awareness alone is not enough. To act, you must want to. The mind is not moved by logic, but by longing. Modern neuroscience reveals that behavior is driven less by the reward itself and more by the anticipation of it. Dopamine, the chemical of motivation, doesn't spike when you achieve something. It spikes when you expect something. That anticipation is the spark of movement, the hum beneath desire. To make it attractive is to align the energy of craving with the direction of growth. Instead of resisting desire, you redirect it. You attach pleasure to what sustains you. A cup of tea with a book, music with exercise, candlelight during journaling. The habit becomes an experience to look forward to rather than a task to endure. The same mechanism that traps us in distraction can free us through design. The monks of old burned incense to make meditation divine. Today's world uses notifications to keep us scrolling. Both are powered by the same loop. Cue, anticipation, reward. One imprisons the mind, the other refines it. Desire is not the enemy, it is the current. The question is only where you choose to let it flow. Then comes simplicity. Most people fail not because change is hard, but because they design it to be hard. The human brain, built for efficiency, always chooses the path of least resistance. What Clear discovered is that success is not about discipline. It is about reducing friction. If you want to eat healthier, make good food easier to reach. If you want to learn, leave the book open where your eyes will fall. If you want to write, place your notebook on the desk before you sleep, so your next morning begins mid-sentence. Change doesn't happen by adding effort, but by removing obstacles. Clear's 2-minute rule distills this perfectly. Every habit should begin in under 2 minutes. Write one sentence, not a chapter. Stretch for 1 minute, not an hour. Meditate for a single breath. Once the first action occurs, momentum does the rest. Physics calls this inertia. An object in motion stays in motion. Psychology calls it activation energy, the initial spark that overcomes hesitation. What matters is not intensity, but continuity. Perfection never built anything. Repetition did. Yet no behavior survives without reward. The human mind does not obey abstraction. It responds to emotion. If something feels good, we repeat it. If it feels empty, we abandon it. This is why destructive habits thrive. They pay immediately. And why meaningful habits fade. Their rewards are delayed. Clear's solution is to close that distance, to bring future satisfaction into the present moment. Track your progress. Visualize your effort. Mark a symbol. Light a candle. Cross a box. Give your brain proof that what you did mattered. Pleasure, when made visible, becomes purpose. This is not indulgence. It is completion. The brain needs closure. Ancient rituals knew this. The bow after prayer, the signature at the end of a letter, the final note that dissolves into silence. It is the satisfaction that tells the mind, this is whole. Without that, habits fade into nothingness, forgotten repetitions with no echo. And beneath these 4 laws, awareness, desire, simplicity, and reward, there hums one deeper truth that Clear never framed as a law, but which underlies them all. You act in harmony with who you believe yourself to be. Behavior is identity expressed. You are not fighting your habits. You are fighting your image of yourself. The smoker who quits, but still believes they are trying not to smoke, will always return. The writer who writes daily, because they are a writer, will never stop. The self-image decides the script before the day begins. Neuroscience explains it through pattern reinforcement, the brain wiring itself to confirm its own narrative. Philosophy explains it through the consistency of the soul, the Stoic idea that your actions must align with your inner logos. Buddhism teaches that you become what you practice. Each system says the same thing. What you repeat becomes what you are. This is why habits are not tools. They are mirrors. They do not just change outcomes. They change identities. The more you repeat an action, the more it carves belief into being. A single act is a whisper. Repetition is a voice. Years of repetition become a personality. You do not need to force transformation. You need to cast votes for the person you wish to become until the election is no longer contested. In the end, the 4 laws are not rules to follow, but directions inward. They are the architecture of human evolution, disguised as a self-help formula. Make it obvious. See what you've ignored. Make it attractive. Love what makes you better. Make it easy. Remove what makes you hesitate. Make it satisfying. Remind yourself that it matters. And somewhere between these repetitions, somewhere between the cue and the reward, a quiet shift takes place. You no longer act because you are trying to change. You act because change has already happened. The habit no longer needs effort. It becomes gravity, invisible, inevitable, and real. That is how small things become revolutions. Not through power, but through pattern. Not through sudden force, but through quiet design. Every time you repeat an act of awareness, you are not reinforcing discipline. You are reinforcing identity. And in the end, identity, not action, is what lasts. Every great idea is a translation of something that came before. When James Clear wrote about atomic habits, he wasn't inventing a new truth. He was giving ancient wisdom a modern language. The deeper one looks, the more it becomes clear that every civilization, every era, and every mind that sought to understand human behavior found the same law waiting quietly beneath the surface. We become what we repeatedly do. Thousands of years before neuroscience could trace the grooves of repetition in the brain, the Stoics spoke of virtue as habit perfected by reason. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Epictetus said that if you want to be good, then do good, one act at a time. They understood what psychology would later confirm, that character is not a gift but a construction. Each action is a thread. Together they weave identity. A single choice may vanish, but a pattern persists. In the quiet courtyards of ancient Athens, Aristotle taught the same thing through different words. He said, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. To him, moral virtue wasn't moral by nature, it was built, repeated, internalized. Goodness was a muscle that strengthened through use. His wisdom, like Clear's, replaced inspiration with design. It wasn't enough to want to be good. You had to build a system that made goodness inevitable. Move further east, and the insight takes a spiritual form. In the Buddhist monasteries of Tibet and India, the monks didn't call them habits, they called them samskaras, the mental imprints left by repeated action and thought. They believed that each thought, each motion, leaves a trace in the mind, shaping how we see and respond to the world. To free the self from suffering, one must not erase these imprints but replace them, through mindfulness, compassion, and awareness, repeated until it becomes effortless. This is nothing less than identity change. The same transformation Clear describes when he says that small habits, practiced daily, build new selves. In the stillness of meditation, they discovered the same neuroplasticity that modern science would prove centuries later. The mind is rewired by attention and repetition. Even the mystics of Sufism and Christian monastic life followed the same path through different metaphors. Their days were built around ritual, prayer at dawn, silence at dusk, recitation at noon, not as obligation, but as calibration. They didn't seek holiness through willpower. They created environments of devotion that made faith habitual. When the Sufi poet Rumi wrote, "What you seek is seeking you," he might as well have been describing the feedback loop of behavior, the truth that what we repeat begins to repeat us. In the language of modern science, these old intuitions have found proof. Neuroscientists studying habit formation discovered that the brain, in its search for efficiency, rewires itself constantly. Through a process known as long-term potentiation, neurons that fire together strengthen their connection. It's the biological equivalent of Aristotle's moral law. Repetition builds permanence. The basal ganglia, a cluster of structures deep within the brain, becomes the keeper of these patterns. Once a habit moves into that system, it no longer requires conscious effort. You have literally built a new neural pathway, a bridge that thought can now cross without resistance. What we call discipline is simply biology trained through patience. And if neuroscience has confirmed what philosophy suspected, psychology has mapped its mechanics. Cognitive behavioral therapy, perhaps the most empirically supported treatment in modern mental health, is built entirely on behavioral loops, the understanding that if you can change action, you can eventually change thought. You do not have to believe something new to begin. You have to behave differently until belief catches up. Behavior shapes emotion. Motion reshapes mind. James Clear's 4 laws are simply a systematized way of applying this therapy to everyday life, not to heal pathology, but to cultivate potential. Across cultures, across centuries, the same truth emerges again and again, that freedom is found not in breaking rules, but in mastering rhythm. The Stoic learns to pause before anger. The monk learns to return to breath. The artist learns to show up. The athlete learns to repeat. Each of them moves closer to liberation, not through one grand gesture, but through a choreography of small ones. The difference between chaos and order, between the life you drift through and the life you design, is repetition. There sits an ancient saying from the Tao Te Ching: watch your thoughts, they become your words. Watch your words, they become your actions. Watch your actions, they become your habits. Watch your habits, they become your character. Watch your character, for it becomes your destiny. It's astonishing that this passage, written over 2,000 years ago, describes precisely the same process modern behavioral scientists measure in labs today. The Taoists called it harmony. Neuroscientists call it plasticity. Clear calls it identity. But the principle has not changed. Reality bends slowly in the direction of what you repeat. When you zoom out across history, a pattern begins to emerge. Every form of wisdom eventually arrives at the same doorway, that the self is not fixed, but formed, and that formation is an act of repetition. Whether it is Aristotle speaking of virtue, Buddha speaking of awareness, or modern psychology speaking of neural loops, all are describing the same unfolding. The mechanics differ, but the melody is identical. You become your rhythm. And in this way, Atomic Habits become something more than a productivity manual. It becomes a bridge between science and spirituality, between the modern and the ancient, between the measurable and the mystical. Because at its core, it whispers the same truth that has echoed for millennia, that every change, no matter how small, is an act of creation. Each repetition is a brushstroke on the portrait of the self. Each moment of awareness is a spark in the machinery of becoming. We often imagine enlightenment as a flash, a sudden irreversible awakening. But perhaps enlightenment, like change itself, is built atom by atom. Perhaps every breath of awareness, every small act of intention, is a particle of illumination. James Clear's words meet Marcus Aurelius's, meet Buddha's, meet modern neuroscience, and all converge on a single insight: transformation is repetition made conscious. So when you perform a small act of kindness, or choose not to delay your work, or read one more page instead of scrolling away the hour, you are not just maintaining discipline. You are participating in an ancient lineage of builders, sculptors of the self, architects of the mind. And though they lived in different centuries, spoke different languages and built temples to different gods, they were all working on the same structure, the inner vault of identity. Every action you take etches a mark upon that inner stone. And if you look closely, under the carvings of all these civilizations, you will still see the same inscription, written again and again in different hands. Change is not an event. It is a pattern. And to master the pattern is to master yourself. There is a silence that follows every great discovery, not the silence of absence, but the silence of realization. It's the stillness that comes when you understand that the extraordinary has always been built out of the ordinary. When you finally see that every great mind, every peaceful life, every healed heart was constructed through the same invisible repetitions that fill your own days. The human mind longs for meaning, but it resists simplicity. We want to believe that purpose lives in grand gestures, the book written in a burst of inspiration, the success earned overnight, the transformation sparked by a single decision. But life does not move in eruptions. It unfolds quietly, one repetition at a time, until you look back and realize the pattern you've been weaving has become who you are. If you've ever watched sunlight move across a wall during the course of a day, you've seen the principle of habit in motion. It's almost imperceptible in the moment, but over time it remakes the entire room. That's what small habits do. They shift the light of your life so slowly that you don't see the transformation until it surrounds you completely. We often underestimate what doesn't demand attention. The mind, drawn to drama, overlooks the power of the subtle, the breath, the posture, the tone of voice, the small act of cleaning, the one page read before sleep. Yet these are the acts that sculpt the inner landscape, because repetition is not just mechanical, it is spiritual. Every repeated motion teaches the body something about who it belongs to. Every small completion whispers a truth to the nervous system. You are capable. You can trust yourself again. In psychology, they call this self-efficacy, the belief that your actions can influence your world. But beneath that clinical term lies something ancient, almost sacred. It is the quiet reknitting of self-trust. Each time you follow through on a promise to yourself, even a small one, you repair the invisible contract between your mind and your will. And as that trust deepens, so does peace. There is a moment that arrives after many repetitions, a subtle crossing point where effort dissolves into flow. At first, the habit feels forced, mechanical, an obligation. But one day, without warning, it becomes natural. The mind stops negotiating. The action and the actor merge. This is the moment of integration, when what you do and who you are become the same. It is the opposite of pretending. It is remembering. You are remembering the version of yourself that existed before hesitation. The great teachers have always spoken of this moment. The Stoics called it harmony with nature. The Buddhists called it right action. The neuroscientists call it automaticity, the stage when behavior moves from effort to instinct. But all these words point to the same experience, when the river of intention finally cuts a clear path through the rock of resistance. This is the real meaning of mastery. Not perfection, not control, but continuity. The ability to show up again and again, gently, patiently, without theatrics. To continue the motion even when no one is watching, even when nothing dramatic is happening, because you have learned to love the quiet rhythm of becoming. There's a reason every great craftsman, monk, and artist eventually falls in love with the routine itself. They realize that the ritual is not a cage, it's a form of liberation. When action becomes habit, the mind is freed from decision. It no longer wastes energy choosing, it simply flows. And in that flow, awareness deepens. What begins as discipline ends as peace. It's tempting to measure progress through milestones. Pages read, kilograms lost, projects finished. But most of the progress that matters will never be measured. It happens in micro-adjustments, inside the mind, in how you handle a setback, in how quickly you return to calm, in how you choose silence over complaint. Those are atomic victories, invisible but powerful. They accumulate quietly, forming the foundation of character. In a way, this is the deepest paradox of all. The more consciously you practice small habits, the more unconscious they become. Awareness builds automation. Intention becomes instinct. The mind teaches the body, and the body eventually teaches the mind back. You learn not only to think differently, but to feel differently about yourself. Every habit becomes a language between your conscious will and your unconscious design, the two sides of the same being, learning to trust one another again. If you ever feel lost in the slowness of your progress, remember this: mountains are carved by water, not by floods, but by flow, not by force, but by consistency. The invisible stream wins because it never stops moving. James Clear's theory, beneath all the charts and frameworks, is not a science of performance. It's a meditation on time. A reminder that growth does not belong to the fast or the gifted, but to the patient. To those who are willing to meet the day not as a battlefield, but as a ritual ground, a place to practice the small gestures that turn into destiny. So when you wake tomorrow, you won't need to chase transformation. You'll only need to notice what you're already repeating, because the pattern is already there, waiting for you to make it conscious. The system is already in motion. The only question is whether you will let it carry you closer to who you were always becoming. And in that realization, there is a strange kind of peace, a silence that hums beneath everything. The silence of progress too small to see. The silence of change that no longer needs to announce itself. The silence of a life being rewritten, quietly, atom by atom, in the direction of something truer. Some truths don't end. They dissolve quietly, like ink sinking into paper. When you finish a book like Atomic Habits, it doesn't leave you with excitement. It leaves you with stillness, a calm understanding that the smallest things were never small at all. That every moment, every decision, every gesture was a thread in the grand tapestry of who you were becoming. You start to notice it everywhere, in the way you place your cup down after drinking, in the way you breathe before speaking, in the rhythm of your footsteps down an empty street. Each of these tiny moments hums with quiet power. Every one of them says the same thing: this is who you are. We often think identity is something defined, but identity is something you build. Not through declarations, but through design. Not through one great act of will, but through thousands of small votes cast in the same direction. Habits are not what you do. They are what you are becoming in real time. Each repetition is an answer to the question life is always asking: who do you choose to be today? It's easy to overlook the quiet revolutions. They don't make noise, they don't ask for recognition, and they rarely feel like progress. But they are. Every time you resist the old impulse, every time you show up without fanfare, every time you keep the promise no one else sees, the architecture of your identity shifts, molecule by molecule. That shift is invisible now, but one day it will appear in everything you touch. The Stoics would say you have trained your soul. The Buddhists would say you have tamed your mind. James Clear would say you have built a system. But in truth, you have done something far simpler and far more sacred. You have remembered that becoming is not a project, it's a pattern. And that the smallest pattern, when tended to with patience, will one day shape the whole design. There's a quiet beauty in that thought, that transformation requires no spotlight, no stage, no perfect day, only the gentle rhythm of repetition, only the faith that what you repeat, you will one day embody. And perhaps that is the deepest wisdom Atomic Habits offers, that change is not about who you wish to be, but about acting as though you already are. That identity is not discovered, it's remembered through behavior. So tonight, as this vault closes, let that be the thought that lingers. Every small action, every gentle choice, every moment of awareness, they are all pages in the same unfinished book, the one you write each day without realizing it. And long after the noise of ambition fades, these small revolutions will remain, steady, quiet, unstoppable. Because change was never about speed, it was about direction. And if you are facing the right way, even the smallest steps will take you there. Another page closes in the vault of words. Until next time.